Welcome, by the way, to the Country Telegraph. I'm Mike Ryan. Nice to have your company. Before we get into our show, headlines from around Australia. Independent fuel retailers on southern York Peninsula, including the Corny Point General Store, the Pines Roadhouse, SYP Motors, and YPAG or Ag Karamalka has zero supply of both unleaded 91 and diesel. That was from last Monday. So the last 3 days, zero fuel. York Peninsula's YPAG Karamalka announced on Facebook yesterday, in fact, it had run out of diesel and only had a short supply of unleaded petrol left. And their supplier was also empty. Things are not looking good on the York Peninsula. But of course, our government has things under control. Not. Victorian Farmers Federation are urging commuters to consider swapping their car for public transport and the government to make public transport free, with the potential fuel savings helping ensure farmers can keep planting, harvesting and producing food. Might actually work in Victoria. I think there's an election very shortly, and South Australia too. Now, Meat and Livestock Australia has announced the successful completion of an MLA donor company AgTech project that has demonstrated reliable and affordable two-way satellite connectivity for livestock. That's right, they can have their iPad as they chew and munch on the grass. And also on-farm internet of things sensors across Australia. Now, the project was led by ESAT Global with Smart Paddock, providing on-farm visualisation, and Viasat delivering satellite connectivity. I think it's a great idea. Fertiliser prices have doubled to $1,600 a tonne in just 10 days, sparking price gouging accusations as farmers scramble for supplies ahead of autumn sowing. And finally, one of WA's most talked about outback stations is officially heading into a new chapter. That's Woolleen Station, which is pretty big to say the least. 134,000 hectare pastoral lease, roughly 700 k's north of Perth in the Murchison area, has been listed for sale, which is just incredible. And hopefully an Australian company will buy it, because that's what we need. We need more investment from within than investment from overseas, because it is Australia after all. That's just my humble opinion.
Did you know they plan to build over 3,000 wind turbines on Queensland's Great Dividing Range? Over 3,700 kilometres of new haulage roads will carve through old growth forest. Destroying forests for industrial renewables makes no sense. It doesn't have to be this way. The intact biodiverse ranges of Queensland are no place for renewables. Take 2 minutes to learn the truth about the destruction they cause. Go to rainforestreserves.org.au.
Just played a commercial, played a PSA, public service announcement, community service announcement, whatever you want to call it. And I'm very, very upset at what the federal government is doing to our landscape, our country, raising the top of the Great Dividing Range, throwing up thousands upon thousands upon thousands of wind turbines, wildlife being killed and discarded, cruel ways of discarding that wildlife. And yet the hypocrites, and I am very upset, so I shouldn't go down this path, but I will. The hypocrites have brought in NEPA, National Environmental Protection Authority, and we have that along with the Greens clapping away, saying how we're going to look after Australia. Yet they let the obliteration of wildlife and the Great Dividing Range and other beautiful areas of Australia, and all based, in my own humble opinion, based on a lie. Stephen Nowakowski is an award-winning wilderness photographer and conservationist. He's based in North Queensland, Australia. Stephen has exhibited internationally, worked in Papua New Guinea and Timor Leste, and collaborated extensively with other world-class photographers, and is also with traditional owners. His spectacular works are in demand around Australia and the world. It reminds us of the precious natural wilderness on our doorstep. He has recently completed a very important report for Rainforest Reserves, mapping the extensive nature of Renewable Energy Project Rollout and environmental concerns. Rainforest Reserves has attracted a legal cost claim after losing a federal court challenge to the Gawara Baya Wind Farm and the proponents. The upper Burdekin Wind Farm Proprietary Limited, majority owned, 75% by Andrew Forrest Group Tattarang. Stephen, thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Hi, Mike. Yeah, great to be here. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Tell us about where you're at the moment with Twiggy Forest.
Yeah, around early last year, we lodged a court challenge, a federal court challenge in the federal court in Sydney, and it was it wasn't a merits-based review, but I forgot the actual name of it now. But it was a challenge against the Minister for Environment's decision to approve the Upper Burdekin Wind Farm project, which has now been renamed as an Aboriginal name, Gawara Baya Wind Farm. As you said, it's majority owned by Andrew Forrest. So we challenged, what I mean by we, Rainforest Reserves Australia, we challenged the Minister's decision, which was Tanya Plebisek, over her decision on approving it when there was clear impacts on migratory bird species that we believe weren't addressed properly in the approval process. And a challenge like that had never been done in the federal court against the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Act. And we wanted to challenge what are our obligations with international bird treaties, our migratory bird treaties, and how that interacts and interplays with proposed wind turbines, because wind turbines will take out we're claiming many of the migratory birds that do visit Australia from the Northern Hemisphere. And some of that evidence is already coming in. We've got some great evidence that has been documented overseas, how that is happening in the Northern Hemisphere. And as we roll out these wind turbines, wind towers across Australia, we're going to see migratory birds diminished as well. So the court case was based on that. What the result of that court case was that the minister, the federal environment minister, does not have to consider international obligations, international treaties such as migratory bird treaties in her decision-making process. She does have to consider them, but she can just allow offsets and mitigate those impacts. And you can't offset and mitigate the killing of migratory birds. And so anyway, so we lost the case because the Environment Minister does have the discretion to make that decision to approve the wind farm. As long as she mitigates and offsets those impacts, everything's okay. So it was a really, really shocking outcome for us, a very shocking outcome for migratory birds, obviously. And it just goes to show that we don't have, our federal government has no obligation to abide by the international treaties that we sign up to, such as the migratory bird obligations.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible to say the least. And I am very upset that anybody as in an organisation, whether government or private or whatever, would do terrible, terrible things to something that cannot be replaced ever again. And if they want to build these turbines, pick another area. But in my humble opinion, Stephen, it's all based on a lie, and it is not about saving the planet at all. It's probably about
Yes, yeah.
lining the pocket of many, or not of many, of a few throughout Australia and globally. Because we look at the
Yeah.
wind turbines, I think a great majority, if not most of them, are funded by overseas interest, and they couldn't give a rat's about Australia and what happens to the terrain. Do you have any
Yeah.
idea on the overseas investment? I see Twiggy's mob, 75% of the Gawara Baya
We've
Wind
got
Farm.
Gawara Baya Wind Farm. Yeah, that's right.
I knew that.
Yeah, the majority of renewables in Australia are owned by international multinational companies. So, for example, Neoen is French, DP Energy is Irish. Um, you've got Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, which is a Scandinavian fund manager. Arc Energy, which is Korea Zinc. The list goes on and on and on. The only Australian-based companies that I know, which is Squadron Energy and WindLab, and both are owned by Andrew Forrest. So it's really being driven by international investment, and what they've done, they can sniff out all the subsidies that are being offered by the Australian government, because none of these projects can stand on their own 2 feet. They all need to be subsidised, and they need money thrown at them, such as the capacity investment scheme. We do not even know how much money is being given away through the capacity investment scheme to these multinational investors and developers, and even the opposition cannot find out that figure because it's all commercial in confidence. So we don't know if it's $1 billion a year, $5 billion a year, $10 billion a year, just going in that one subsidy scheme alone to allow these multinational companies to come in, destroy our biodiversity. Here in Queensland, these wind towers are going into our high elevation, high biodiversity ranges. That is the place where the wind resources are, and the government is giving this industry a free kick. And even just recently, we had the nature reform laws go through. So the new version of the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Act that was approved, passed by the federal government, and that, as far as I'm concerned, was rushed through Parliament purely to fast-track renewables in this country. You know, I've been a conservationist for 30 years, campaigning for reforms of the EPBC Act, and couldn't get any reforms through the system at all because of its weak interpretations and so forth. But now that there's this $1 trillion industrial juggernaut wanting to move into this country and decimate our biodiversity and destroy our energy sovereignty and energy security, the nature reform laws were just fast-tracked through Parliament within a matter of weeks. In a matter of weeks, they were fast-tracked through Parliament to fast-track renewables. That's what it was all about. Yeah.
It's very disturbing. What about the response from the Queensland government, for example? Are they doing anything, or is it just?
Yeah, so the Queensland government have been good. Compared to the previous state Labor government, they fast-tracked these projects. Dozens and dozens and dozens of projects were just approved overnight, quickly. This new LNP government have been fantastic in respect to slowing the process down and actually giving local communities a genuine say on the projects in their backyards. That was never the case under the other previous state Labor government. There was no capacity and no enforcement or no obligation for developers to consult with local communities. And there was even no capacity for local councils to even have a say at all where these big industrial projects were being located within their regional councils. Whereas now, these new reforms by the state Liberal National Party mean that these developments have to tick certain boxes. They need to quantify public consultation and engagement with local councils. There's still a long way to go. The environmental side of their what they call the State Code 23 for wind farms, their state legislation, is still very poor in terms of environmental checks and balances. Things like erosion and sediment control needs a lot of work, but at least they're going in the right direction, and they're slowing the process down so genuine regional communities can have a say. And they've also pulled back a few of the really bad projects that we've been advocating against, such as the Moonlight Range Wind Farm. And they also pulled out recently of the Tattarang West Wind Farm as well. So that was fantastic.
What about support from other green groups? Because I recall, Stop the Dam in Tassie and stuff. I mean, I was part of those.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it was all, if you collectively get together, it's amazing what you can achieve. Any other green groups behind you? And by the way, what about the Greens? Where are they? Tell me.
Yeah, the Greens are deluded, and I believe at some point there will be a Royal Commission. There has to be, because the amount of corruption and environmental destruction, the loss of energy sovereignty, energy security, the fact that none of this has been costed. We've done some basic costings around $1.3 trillion to roll out the 31,000 wind towers that are required, the 6,000 kilometres of transmission. But the fact that Chris Bowen has never announced what the final cost of this is, there has to be a Royal Commission. This is one of the biggest transfers of wealth in Australian history, and no one is asking any questions. Going back to the conservation groups, they're completely missing in action. I think because they've been campaigning for renewables for 2 decades, and now that we're seeing renewables smashing up high biodiversity, they don't know how to turn the Titanic around. But also too, I think it's a bit more sinister than that. The fact that they are receiving money from NGOs such as the Sunrise Project. And the Sunrise Project is an organisation that it raises money, we don't know where that money comes from, but then distributes those funds to conservation groups around Australia. And there's strings attached, and they need to campaign on wind and sun as the only solution to reduce our emissions. And if any of these conservation groups talk about nuclear or geothermal or other emission-free technology, they lose their funding. And again, that's why we need a Royal Commission. We need to understand how the conservation groups have been working in lockstep with industry. And conservation groups are basically industry advocates pushing for wind and sun, for wind farms and solar panels. And it's just crazy. So we're basing, they're advocates for Chinese-made solar panels. And when I was a part of the conservation movement, the last thing that I would be prepared to do is to advocate for industry. There's already so many other organisations out there that advocate for industry. There's industry lobby groups, there's the union movement. Conservation groups should be concentrating on biodiversity, protecting forests, keeping trees in the ground. But at the moment, conservation groups are only campaigning on wind and sun and technology that's made offshore, owned by foreign multinational companies.
Who funded Sunrise?
Well, we don't know.
Would have been
because they're a charity. Well, because they're a charity. Yeah, they're a charity. They don't need to declare where that money comes from. So, for example, last financial year, they dispersed $77 million into all the conservation groups around Australia. So organisations like the Queensland Conservation Council, Cairns and Far North Environment Centre, Mackay Conservation Council, Rockhampton Conservation Council, the Australian Conservation Foundation, the Wildness Society. They're all receiving money from the Sunrise Project, and the strings that are attached is that they cannot campaign on any other emissions-free technology except wind and sun. And the reason why I know this is because I do know of a group that was receiving money. They mentioned in the media that nuclear must be a part of our energy mix. The very next day, that group received a phone call and their funding was being withdrawn from the Sunrise Project. The Sunrise Project was set up by Hepburn. He was a founding member of Greenpeace in Australia. And he set the organisation up to raise money to divvy out to conservation groups to combat climate action. However, now it's really just campaigning on wind and sun technology. And $77 million is a lot of money. It's not coming from mums and dads in Australia. Most Australians wouldn't even know what the Sunrise Project is, which makes me and others think that it's actually coming from industry. So Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, Vestas, which are wind turbine manufacturers. We don't know if it's those big companies donating to the Sunrise, knowing that that money then gets divvied out to conservation groups so that they campaign as industry advocates for those companies.
Yeah, our next guest, who's going to be our first guest, but she's waiting, Anne Webster's waiting for us. She's written new legislation to protect prime agricultural land based on mapping different land according to their agricultural use. It's modelled on Queensland and New South Wales legislation. I wonder if it would be useful maybe for them to look at your mapping project if they haven't already. What do you think?
Yeah, so what we've done at Rainforest Reserves, we've mapped where all the renewables are going across Australia. And I know I have supplied Anne's office with the link. I know she has seen it. It was quite funny, because the day that we launched that in October last year, we had that website hacked and data stolen. We've now moved that data onto a new server. We've employed a cyber technology person to write some software so it can't be hacked. And then we also received a lot of criticism by the conservation groups to say, there's projects that are wrong or this and that. However, I've only received, there was one letter from Squadron Energy that came up with a few discrepancies on the mapping, and they were very, very minor discrepancies. And that's all the industry could find on that mapping. There was 1,300 projects in the pipeline across Australia, renewable projects, which include BESS batteries, wind farms and solar. There's 1,300 projects, and Squadron Energy found, I think, 5 or 6 discrepancies, which I think is quite remarkable. And this is work that should have been done by Chris Bowen to showcase to Australians the cumulative impact of renewables across Australia. And it should also be done by conservation groups. They've got the resources to do this. Like I just said, the Australian Conservation Foundation, they had an operating budget of $17 million a year, and I've got no idea what they've spent that money on. They should be doing the mapping and providing overlays to communities like Anne Webster's community down south to show communities where these projects are going and where the interface is across places of high biodiversity and also high value agricultural land. And no one's doing this work. And I just find it gobsmacking. And this is why we need a Royal Commission.
I totally agree with you. I think it's again, I'm very upset at this, and I don't want our country just looking like a giant fan. And the other things which we have talked about, we haven't got time now because Anne's waiting for us, is that the after the 20 years, who's responsible for clearing the old blades, the old turbines? And I think you mentioned to me that many companies are designed to actually shut their doors 20 years' time. So therefore, it's left up to for example, the government or those on the land, which is just terrible. They've got to.
It's the host landowner.
Yeah, it's just terrible. Stephen, we've run out of time. I do apologise.
No worries,
I love your green screen in the background. Not.
Oh, that's real life. That's the backyard.
I know. I'm jealous.
I've usually got wallabies down the back, but they're not here today. They're not there at the moment.
Just get some stuffed, those toy ones made in China. Stick them around.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, somebody wants to get hold of you and find out more about what you're doing. How do they do that?
Well, through the Rainforest Reserves website. So go to the website. You'll see a contact page there, and get in touch with us that way.
Stephen Nowakowski, always a pleasure. I'm very jealous of your backyard, by the way. I want it.
Yeah,
all right, take care.
Thank you. Yeah,
This is
Thank you.
Country Telegraph.